An archives is not only the repository of the documentary heritage of an institution, but also its collective memory and passive witness of its historical past. An archives, on the one hand, facilitates transparency and efficiency in the administration, and on the other hand, it provides deep insight into the history of an organization. With such objectives, the Center for Judicial Archives was established on 1st of May 2022 by the High Court of Orissa, and today it is celebrating its 1 year. Namaskar and a very good evening to one and all present here. I, Ashish Patnaik, Additional Coordinator, High Court of Orissa Arbitration Center, on behalf of the High Court of Orissa, extend my heartiest greetings to everyone on this grand occasion. Now, I humbly request Dr. Justice S. Muralidhar, Honorable Chief Justice, High Court of Orissa, to kindly adorn the dais. I would now request Honorable Chief Justice Debabata Das, Judge, High Court of Orissa, and Chairman RRDC Committee to kindly adorn the dais. May I now request Honorable Dr. Justice Sanjeev Kumar Panigrahi, Judge, High Court of Orissa, and Member, RRDC Committee, to kindly adorn the dais. I now request the Chief Guest of today's function, Dr. Prabhu Prasad Mohapatra, Professor of History, Delhi University, to kindly adorn the dais. I now request Dr. Lalatendu Das Mohapatra, Director cum OSD, Center for Judicial Archives of the High Court of Orissa, to kindly adorn the dais. We are honored to have the gracious presence of Honorable Dr. Justice S. Muralidhar, Honorable Chief Justice, High Court of Orissa, on the dais. We are also extremely fortunate to have on the dais Honorable Sri Justice Debabata Das, Honorable Dr. Justice Sanjeev Kumar Panigrahi, Dr. Prabhu Prasad Mohapatra, and Dr. Lalatendu Das Mohapatra. We are also fortunate to have amongst us the Honorable Judges of the High Court of Orissa, despite their busy schedule on this momentous occasion. We also have with us Professors of History of the Department of History, Ravenshaw University, Cuttack, Professors of History, Department of History, Utkal University, Bani Bihar, Bhubaneswar, faculty members and students of various law colleges and universities, the members of the registry, the officers of the Odisha Judicial Academy and Odisha State Legal Services Authority, and the members of the print and electronic media. We thank everyone for the benign presence in this gathering. May I now seek the permission of the Honorable Chair to declare the event as open. Thank you, sir. The event is declared open. May I now request Honorable Sri Justice Debabata Das, Judge, High Court of Orissa, and Chairman RRDC Committee, to kindly present the welcome address. My lord, please.
A very good evening to all who are present in this evening with us. Honorable Dr. Justice S. Muralidhar, our beloved Chief Justice, Honorable Sister and Brother Judges of the High Court, Today's chief guest, Dr. Prabhu Prasad Mahapatra, Professor of History, Delhi University, Sri Lalatendu Das Mahapatra, the Director Archives, Professors and Principals of Law Colleges and Universities, Professors and Head of the Department of History of different universities, distinguished guests from the government, Registrar General and officers of the Registry, Member Odisha State Legal Services Authority, Director Odisha Judicial Academy, members of print and electronic media, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense pleasure in welcoming you all to this grand occasion. It is just few months back, Honorable Chief Minister of Odisha, Sri Naveen Patnaik, laid the foundation stone for the Center for Judicial Archives, and today we all have gathered to celebrate the completion of 1 year of the Center for Judicial Archives. We are fortunate to have Dr. Prabhu Prasad Mahapatra, Professor of History, Delhi University, with us. We heartily welcome you, sir, in today's function as our chief guest. An archive is not only the repository of the documentary heritage of an institution, but its collective memory and passive witness of its historical past. Therefore, archiving the records of historical value and administrative importance should be one of the important objectives of any institution. The setting up of the Center for Judicial Archives by the Odisha High Court is a historic step which has thrown open all its fragile records to the public for consultation. It is the first of its kind in India. Having completed 1 year in our march in this direction, we are today adding one more feather in the cap as by launching the website of the center, which will be very much beneficial to the scholars and researchers. The work on the digitization of records, though had begun in the High Court of Odisha in some time past, it gained actual acceleration after Dr. Justice S. Muralidhar came as our Chief Justice. Under his steward leadership, the new RRDC building was planned and constructed. He gave the digitization a new initiative, a new life in the entire state of Odisha, which has opened the eyes for other high courts and states. Since the modern judicial system in Odisha started with annexation of Odisha in different phases from the second half of the 18th century, both the High Court of Odisha and different district courts have left with us millions of invaluable case records and documents, which not only require archiving but also consultation for reconstruction of the judicial and legal history of Odisha. Since Persian was the official language till 1839, all the records pertaining to Sadar Diwani Adalat, Sadar Nijamat Adalat, apart from the Munsip Court of Cuttack till 1839, are exclusively in Persian language. In 1839, by the order of the government, English and vernaculars came to be used in court. Therefore, after 1839, Persian along with English and other vernacular languages such as Odia, Bengali and Telugu are found to have been used in court documents. Realizing the importance of preserving these documentary heritages with an archiving policy and using them as source material for writing the judicial history of the state, Dr. Justice S. Muralidhar, the Chief Justice of our High Court, mooted the idea of setting up a judicial archives consisting of all fragile records of courts till 1950. As almost all records are fragile and worm-eaten, their repair and scientific preservation has been the main priority of the center. These records of 70 to 215 years old were kept in an atmosphere not conducive to proper ventilation, as a result of which they were infected with fungus and worm. To save them from further deterioration, their proper and scientific preservation and storage was therefore the immediate priority of our center. While repairing the records, the modern parameter of fumigating, lining, guarding, stitching and binding are followed. Since the files are infected with worm and fungus, they are fumigated in the fumigation chamber. as a digitally controlled vault with chemicals under controlled temperature before treatment. The journey for center, which was started on 1st of May 2022 with acquisition of more than 50,000 fragile records and equal number of records identified and ready to be transferred to its custody, has made a milestone in the history of archives in India. In such rapid progress of acquisition in a short span of time, by keeping these court records in public domain, the center has allowed access to the scholars. With the setting up of its own dedicated building, its activities have increased in many folds. The entire work of preservation of archival records and upgrading the museum was entrusted to INTAC Odisha chapter. But before that, Dr. Justice Muralidhar, the Chief Justice, desired to lead a team consisting of His Lordship, Justice Sasikant Mishra and Dr. Lalitendu Das Mahapatra to visit some leading museums, archives and libraries in India to get an insight about their preservation, upkeeping of records and digitization system for their possible adaptation here. The visit to these institutions provided deep insight about preservation and digitization system of records and showcasing system of gallery for the museum. The center has been created on trust, devotion and hard work. All the judicial officer staffs attached to this institution have been doing excellent job and are committed in giving their best to set an example for other courts and states. However, the challenges are lot many in developing the institution. But we are sure that with the dedication and commitment of all, we will be able to achieve the goal in realizing the dream of the Honorable Chief Justice into reality under His Lordship's continuous guidance at every point. I welcome you all once again to this program. Jai Jagannath. Thank you.
Thank you, Lordship, for the hearty welcome extended to our honorable guests. May I now request the esteemed Dr. Lalatendu Das Mahapatra, Director cum OSD, Center for Judicial Archives, to kindly address the gathering.
Chief Justice of High Court of Odisha, Dr. Justice S. Muralidhar, Chief Guest of today's occasion, Professor Prabhu Prasad Mahapatra, Honorable Sri Justice Debabrata Das, Honorable Dr. Justice Sanjeev Kumar Panigrahi, Honorable Members of RRDC Committee, Honorable Judges of the High Court of Odisha, esteemed Registrar General, Members of the Registry, Director, Judicial Academy, representatives from print and electronics media, invited dignitaries, students, and ladies and gentlemen. It is heartening to note that the Center for Judicial Archives is celebrating its first anniversary after a momentous 1 year. This archives is the first of its kind in India, as there seems to be no conscious efforts by any court in India to make an archives with court records. The center was declared to have been established by Home Department's notification number 14380 dated 1st May 2022, but it actually started functioning on 10th May 2022. In its 1 year of existence, it has created few milestones to its credit. It has acquired 63,807 fragile records so far of Sadar Diwani Adalat, First Appeal, Second Appeal, Civil Revision, and District Court records of different districts of Odisha. It is quite amazing to note that many of its records are more than 200 years old, dating back to as early as 1808, but have survived the test of the time. Though many of these records were lying in a shabby condition, they are still readable, which inspired our Honorable Chief Justice of the High Court to preserve them for the posterity by creating an archives with all characteristics of a modern archives like listing, cataloging, conservation, digitization, and consultation of records. Immediately after its establishment, the center initiated simultaneous action of scientific preservation, listing, cataloging, digitization, and consultation of these records. Since a good catalog is the key to retrieve information, the center's first step in this regard was to prepare a provisional catalog of the records, which is as good as listing. In this process, the center has listed and provisionally catalogued 14,344 files so far. This action is the prelude to the preparation of the descriptive catalog of records, which gives a brief insight about their contents. But as the records are also in various languages such as Persian, Odia, Telugu, English, and Bengali, steps are also being taken to engage scholars well proficient in these languages. As the early records are in Persian language, about 1,000 in number, a Persian scholar has been engaged to prepare their descriptive catalog. Steps are also being initiated to engage scholars in Telugu, Bengali, and Odia languages. After cataloging, the records are sent for conservation. This work has been assigned to INTEC, who have treated and conserved so far 26,000 sheets or 1,110 fragile files. Thereafter, they are digitized. The center has digitized so far 11,743 sheets or 622 files. After digitization, their accession is allowed to the scholars and public in the research room. A significant achievement of the center is rejuvenation of Museum of Justice. This judicial museum is perhaps the first of its kind in India. Its upgradation involves deep and meticulous research and extensive search of materials from different archives and libraries. The team of researchers headed by Honorable Sri Justice Sasikanta Misra searched and collected good number of materials from Odisha State Archives, National Archives, Asiatic Society, West Bengal State Archives, Odisha State Museum, Parliament Library, Center for Social Science, and Gopabandhu Bhavan, which have adorned the galleries of the museum. Besides, visits have also been made to different district courts in Odisha to search and collect antique objects and old records, which are now showcased in the museum. Further, the center has also undertaken another ambitious project of compiling the judicial and legal history of Odisha in 2 volumes. This effort is quite challenging, as no monograph on the subject seems to have been available so far. For this project, 2 senior research consultants, one in history and one in law, have been engaged, who are to be assisted by a group of young researchers consisting of both law and history disciplines. During the course of our collection of materials for upgrading the Museum of Justice, we realized that there is immense potential for writing the judicial history of Odisha, for which adequate materials are available in different archives and libraries, apart from side references in inscriptions and ancient and medieval texts. The first volume of the project will cover the ancient and medieval period, and the second volume will cover the modern period. We expect to release the first volume in the month of July this year. Further, we are also very glad to share that the government of Odisha, who is very much supportive to the entire project of preserving the judicial heritage and history of Odisha, has allotted a piece of land measuring 1.88 acres adjacent to RRDC building and Ain Seva Bhavan to construct a dedicated building for the Center for Judicial Archives. An amount of rupees 35 crores have been sanctioned for the project, and the construction work has already started. It is expected to be completed in 15 months. Once the center starts functioning in its own building, it will start acquiring more records from different district courts in Odisha, which will increase its work program manifold. Last but not the least, this center will not only be an archival institution of routine functions like acquisition, preservation, digitization, and consultation of records, but an academic forum for integrated research in history, law, justice, archival, and heritage management, in which regular programs like seminars and symposia will be held in collaboration with different academic institutions. Cuttack is said to be the cultural and intellectual capital of Odisha. With the establishment of Center for Judicial Archives and Museum of Justice, the High Court of Odisha has added one more filament in the cultural and heritage life of the city. When this center will grow to its full potential in its own building, one may hope that this will become one of the most sought after intellectual destinations of the city. So, Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your experience. May I now seek permission from the dais for releasing the booklet commemorating 1 year of the Center for Judicial Archives. I also request all the dignitaries on the dais to join the Honorable Chief Justice in releasing the booklet. Thank you, sir. May I now seek the permission from the dais for making a video presentation on the Center for Judicial Archive. Thank you, sir.
The High Court of Odisha undertook an ambitious project to digitize its records, both legacy and present, in the year 2011. The whole project was revisited with a more scientific and integrated approach from 2021. It was also decided to include the records of the district courts, in which, as a pilot project, 4 districts, Cuttack, Ganjam, Sambalpur and Balesore were chosen. While reorganizing record rooms of the High Court and the 4 district courts named above for the purpose of digitization, certain very old records, including judgments dating back to even more than 2 centuries, were stumbled upon. While some of such records were found to be in a fairly good condition, most of the others had been rendered extremely fragile. This necessitated urgent conservation of such records. Realizing the importance of preserving these documentary heritages with an archiving policy and using them as source materials for writing the judicial history of the state, Dr. Justice S. Muralidhar, the Chief Justice of the High Court of Odisha, in a letter dated 22nd March 2022, addressed to the Chief Minister of Odisha, solicited the cooperation of the Government of Odisha for the project with the 3 distinct objectives of preservation and digitization of records, documenting the judicial history of the state, and revamping the existing museum. The Chief Minister, in his reply dated 2nd April 2022, by reciprocating the idea, reaffirmed that preservation of the heritage and history of Odisha is one of the stated priorities of his government. He therefore assured his full support for the establishment of the Center for Judicial Archives, the revamping of the Museum of Justice, and the digitization of case records. In this process, the Center for Judicial Archives was set up on 1st May 2022. The center is the first of its kind in India, which at present preserves in its custody about 51,308 fragile records of the High Court of Odisha and other district courts. Thus, Dr. Lalatendu Das Mahapatra, the former Deputy Director of the National Archives of India, was selected and joined as the Director cum Officer on Special Duty in the Center for Judicial Archives on 10th May 2022. For effective monitoring, identification, conservation, digitization and cataloging of fragile records, the Center for Judicial Archives, High Court of Odisha, started functioning in the building of Record Room Digitization Center. The fragile record room of Cuttack itself treasures a huge number of old records, as old as early 19th century. As almost all fragile records were brittle and worm-eaten, their repair and scientific preservation was of utmost importance. These records ranged from 70 to 215 years old and were preserved in an atmosphere not conducive to proper ventilation, as a result of which they had been infected with fungus and worms. While repairing the records, the modern parameter of fumigating, lining, guarding, stitching, and binding were being done. Since the files are infected with worm and fungus, they were fumigated in the fumigation chamber at first, a digitally controlled vault with chemicals like paradichlorobenzene and thymol with controlled temperature before treatment, after which the files were chemically treated and conserved using a series of steps leading to effective preservation of the documents. The records, those are preserved and digitized, are open to researchers, scholars, and academicians for consultation of such records. A dedicated research room has been built with researching facilities. The records and catalogs are available in a kiosk dedicated for consultation of digitized old records. The fragile records are immensely brittle. Thus, the records are required to be kept in an atmosphere where further damage will not be caused to the fragile records prior to their conservation and digitization. Though the records of RRDC are preserved in compactors, the fragile records are being preserved in custom-made acid-free carton box which are kept in separate chamber and shells. The fragile records up to 1950 are not to be destroyed because of their archival value. While digitizing the records, the same parameters are to be followed as much as possible as in the case of non-fragile records. The parameters include scanning as a PDF with OCR, paging, indexing, application of barcode, creation of proper metadata for each document, along with usage of cutting-edge technologies like overhead scanners for better scanning results. Since cataloging of record is necessary for retrieval of information, the Center has so far made provisional cataloging of 13,796 files, which includes the records of Sadr Diwani Adalat, Second Appeal, First Appeal, revisions. In this catalog, a brief description of subject matter, the party in whose favor the decree is decided is also mentioned. The government of Odisha, on a request by the High Court of Odisha, has allotted a piece of land measuring acre 1.884 decimal adjacent to the RRDC building, where construction of this majestic building has already begun. The foundation stone of Center for Judicial Archives was laid by Shri Naveen Patnaik, Honorable Chief Minister of Odisha, and Honorable Shri Justice Vineet Saran, former Judge, Supreme Court of India, in the presence of Dr. Justice S. Muralidhar, Chief Justice, High Court of Odisha, and the companion judges of the High Court of Odisha on 28th January 2023. The Center for Judicial Archives is functioning in the RRDC building, having all the required facilities for conservation and consultation of archival records. The center is equipped with dedicated employees and sheer motivation for preservation of the repository of judicial history of the state. The conservation, digitization, and cataloging of archival records are ongoing, and this process shall be developed and innovated through the effective functioning of the center.
to commemorate the occasion and to display the work already done by the Center for the benefit of law and history scholars, the Honorable High Court of Orissa has dedicated an exclusive website for the Center for Judicial Archives. May I now request Dr. Justice S. Mullidhar, Honorable Chief Justice, High Court of Orissa, to kindly launch the website for the Center for Judicial Archives. Thank you, sir. We are indeed fortunate to have amongst us Dr. Prabhu Prasad Mahapatra, Professor of History, Delhi University, as our chief guest. Dr. Mahapatra is a celebrated historian. Sir completed his PhD from JNU in the year 1990 on the topic Aspects of Agrarian Economy of Chota Nagpur for the period 1880 to 1950. Sir is a founding member and secretary of Association of Indian Labour Historians. He is also a member of Joint Advisory Committee of Integrated Labour History Research Program of V.B. Giri National Labour Institute, and Sir is also a member of Law and Society Indian History Congress. Sir is the author of the work Labour Matters Towards Global Histories, and his areas of interest are history of labour and working classes, transnational labour history, history of Indian diaspora, economic history of modern India, environmental history, etc. He had stints as a visiting professor at many foreign universities. He has also received fellowship from many foreign universities, including the University of Cambridge. Now, may I have the proud privilege to request Dr. Prabhu Prasad Mahapatra, Professor of History, Delhi University, to kindly address the gathering. Sir, please.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chief Justice Dr. Muralidharan, Honorable Justices Dr. Sanjeev Panigrahi, Debabrata Das, and my colleague Lolatendra Das Mahapatra, the Director of the Center. And a warm I'm deeply honored and privileged to have been invited by Dr. Muralidhar and the Center for Judicial Archives to come and speak before you. I know that you're all busy people, and to tell you the truth, I need to seek an anticipatory bail from the judges here. I am an interloper. I am not actually a law historian, neither am I excepting that I have some family connections. I am a fourth generation family of lawyers, from family of lawyers. And I have my great-grandfather, my grandfathers, and my uncles are all lawyers. My cousins are lawyers. But for me, must say, law was more mystical than anything palpable. Though I lived and grew in the absolute vicinity of, in Bhadrak, in this, in the next to the kacheri or the courthouse. But my feeling about law was purely of mystic. So seeing my grandfather or even my great-grandfather, I used to think that they are high priests or shamans. By waving their hands, they can bring in spirits of truth into this. I was always mystified by that, and I kept a distance from this. And obviously I chose a much more humbler profession than this one. So I seek your indulgence. And secondly, I have never seen such a gaggle of judges. I don't know what's the collective noun of judges, but I'm not even sure that I address you properly. I'm not even sure that I'm dressed properly for this. I am a bit kind of overwhelmed by this. But let me go beyond this, and in the short time that I have, seek your indulgence in trying to speak a little bit. I seek your indulgence, judges, justices here, honorable justices, that I would like to throw out some ideas and build on some ideas. I don't know how good they are, but I won't assure you that I'll be close to facts, though, whether you like my interpretation or not. But before I say that, I would like to speak in two parts of this. First is, of course, to tell you how overwhelmed I have been by visiting these archives. I'm a historian. I've worked in archives all over the world. I've seen how archives are organized elsewhere. I had no hope that our archives will see an archive like this. I had always wanted to work on judicial archives. I've always wanted to see that judicial records, or the way the judicial records would have, because I'm deeply interested in judicial records as a window to the social history of our country. I think that's very, very important. Apart from being records of the development of judiciary and development of justice systems in India, what is so crucial for me as a historian and for the school of history to which I belong, which is interested in people or interested in the history of how people reacted or received law, how law impacted their daily lives, how law impacted and created conditions under which they could carry out their daily lives, especially poor people and workers, because I'm a labor historian. I've always found that it is perhaps through this window that I could find a much bigger social history. Some of the best writings on social history in the world have been using judicial records. I want to just put out some names. Edward Thompson, E.P. Thompson, wrote this great history of the making of the English working class based on thousands and thousands of records, local records, and justices' records or magistrates' records of the local areas of England. Another great historian, Peter Linebaugh, wrote a great book called London Hanged, which is based again on systematic records which were kept of in the county offices in Britain. Compared to that, we have hardly any study of that. The path shown by these great pioneers to go into areas which is not illumined by great events but by the daily struggle of workers, judicial records provide one fantastic window for that. And there, when I see this, I was so overwhelmed. I can barely. Let me just. I've come not. I haven't come here to praise Dr. Muralidhar. I haven't come here to. I just have to keep myself to the topic that I want to do. What I'm going to do is these two things. I'm going to first and foremost think about the question of archives and history. It will be a bit speculative. Judges, please forgive me. And then I will try and develop my ideas into looking at how the archives, what principle organizes archives, and what impact it has on social groups and social relations. And in that, I will take up, very briefly, I'll take up a particular type of law, and I think many of you perhaps are very well aware of it, but it is a kind of a law which is seen as kind of a relic of the past, but which is an interesting law, which I call the master servant's law. And I'll be speaking about its brief career and its relation to history of the workers and especially to the archives. By locating, paradoxically, the people or the law which is not recorded, law which doesn't produce records, so that which doesn't get archived. Looking at this particular law and its peculiarity, perhaps we can have a sense of how important legal records are, what is the value of archives to society in general. I'm speaking today in a period we know how deeply threatened my discipline is, history is. I see excision of history in textbooks. I see excision and inversion, complete turning around of history in many, many parts, and we sometimes feel helpless in trying to counter it. But I know also, because I do history, I learn history, I also know that this too will come to pass. And we shall again be able to recover much of the glory of our discipline. I begin first by generally speaking about using a syllogism which was taught to me by, by my revered teacher who passed away 3 years back, Professor Sabyasachi Bhattacharya. He wrote, especially because when we are trying to build an archive of especially the undocumented people, that is the laboring people, he wrote this line which I want to talk to you about and develop something around it. He said, archives is to society what memory is to human beings. Let me please develop this syllogism a little further. What is it? We know that memory is central to formation of core identity of a person. We know what happens when dementia takes over, when people lose their memory, how deeply destructive is of individual identity. So in a sense, the core identity of human society or our society has to be found in the storehouse of its memory, which is in the archives. This particular syllogism can be developed only to a certain extent. I want to develop it in this way, to say that it appears as if memory, in a sense, is everything that we remember, everything that we can remember and store it mechanically in a certain place. But we also know that memory is produced. Memory is made. Especially all of you young scholars and young students would know in the age of internet and selfies and Instagram how memories are created and continuously reproduced. Memory making. In the same way, archives must be thought of as also being produced. Second, memories are essentially selective. It is impossible to remember everything. There's a famous story of Borges, the Argentinian novelist and short story writer, about a man who remembered everything. He remembered so much that he could barely move. He got immobilized. Remembering itself is the task, and remembering everything is so excessively capital intensive, let's say, so capital intensive on our brain that we have learned how to selectively forget. So forgetting is very much central to the process of memory making. So this is very, very important, because exactly in the same way, the archives are in some sense not only about remembering, but also selecting what could be remembered. Who remembers what? Who is making that memory? So archives is also selective. The origin of the archives always historically has been through a process of weeding out. Documents which are not necessary are the first step in producing the archive. The archive is produced through destruction. That's the first thing. Just like memory is produced through selective forgetting or selective memory, similarly archives are produced through destruction. I think Lalatendu would know, having worked in the National Archive, the origin of National Archives in India or in archives elsewhere is what can be stored and what cannot be stored. Who will store what? So in some sense, this selection, the criteria of selection has changed from time to time. What is important? Who's making the archives? They decide what is remembered and what is selected and what is not selected. So this is the second point about the syllogism that I was talking about. The development of archives is based on certain type of selection, and this selection is important. So following from that would arise who manages to enter the archives and who is taken out of the archives. Now this is a major issue in history or theoretical understanding of history, that we are given archives or sources which have had some degree of selection, prior selection. Some selections are, thank you so much, some selection, judges make me very nervous. So I haven't seen so many judges at the same time. So where I was, so what is selected and what is remembered in the archives? So we are given this as a particular. So what the third point I was saying is about the question of power and archives. Now this is now become an important subject to think, that archives are not innocent in some sense. We are now much more used to the idea that archives are not innocent. Archives are a record of power. And I try to illustrate in the second part of my talk, when I develop it in the second part of my talk, that archives in some sense, even though it has some countervailing exercises it can be done, archives are creatures of power, creatures of state in the first place, because the function of archives centrally has been authentication, authorization. Who can speak? and whose records are valid. This is a central function of the archives, and it has always been linked to the state and the power of the state. Of course, there are private archives. There are ways in which individuals have created archives. All judges create their own archives. All historians have created their own archives. Individual archives are created around things. But the central function, as I said, its link to power is very important. That doesn't take away the fact, even if you are suspicious of it, that in some sense, the judges and the historians have a common ground. Now, this is the second part of the first section that I want to develop. Is there a relation between the way judges think, lawyers think? Is there a relation between legal thinking and history? And that's where I want to bring back the question of judicial archives, the specificity of judicial archives. It's in a brilliant article written by Carlo Ginzburg, who's a great social historian, microhistorian, one of the greatest in the world, had exactly looked at this question. Judges and history. Are judges and historians in the same way? Of course, what he tried to say or looked at the paths in which legal reasoning and the main function of judges and the main ways they think and how historians do, how it intersects at certain points and diverges at other points. Let me just very quickly go through just to say that both judges and historians are looking for truth, are seeking truth. That means around a set of controlled protocols through which it is possible to find truth, through examination, verification, through processes of strict control of chains of causality, the link between a fact and its inferences drawn very sharply. These constituted the protocols of judicial protocols, very well-known judicial protocols. These are also, in some ways, protocols of history. But immediately there, we have a divergence. While judges are burdened with the fact that they have to find truth, historians are far more modest. They seek truth, but they're happy with plausibility. It's important that we don't keep the thing open. Judges decide, judges sentence. Historians have no power to sentence. Historians at least keep it plausible. What they seek finally is towards truth, but plausible truth, rather than absolute and certain truth, which is the function of the judge. So this allows for a certain way of looking at the work of the historian. I want to just cite you one brilliant work by a colleague of mine and my ex-colleague, my former colleague and a great historian, Shahid Amin, who worked on the Chauri Chaura event, a great book called Event, Metaphor and History, which is about the Chauri Chaura event, and looked at the judicial archive and how that judicial archive was produced about an event in which, as you know very well, in Chauri Chaura, 22 policemen were killed and about 178 people were judged. Gandhi withdrew the first non-cooperation movement because of that, and so on and so forth. The nationalists have looked at Chauri Chaura as something which is to be avoided. Gandhi himself distanced himself from it. And the judiciary produced, or the judges produced, a particular type of truth by creating approvers and using the approvers to produce a certain sentencing. Shahid Amin goes through this study to show how judicial archiving, the judicial archive which is produced, and the judges' efforts to create that truth. Of course, this was the period of colonial power. So in a sense, the colonial power had some other, it was a truth this sort, but the truth which was produced through extensive use of an approver's testimony. The system of approvers being used for sentencing or for judicial justice process was there actually during the Thuggy period. William Sleeman, the Thuggy, had actually created a whole set of people who confessed and had to confess that the act of doing Thuggy. We know it was in fact paid for. The Thuggy approvers were paid 4 rupees a month, monthly, so that they can all be brought in at any time and produce the truth which is there. That Thuggy was a conspiracy of a cult and so on and so forth. We know now historically that was wrong. But anyway, this is the way in which certain judicial truths were produced. So Shahid Amin had to move out of the archives to look at oral memory of this, how people remembered Chauri Chara. But he doesn't say that I'm saying that this is wrong, the judicial truth is wrong, or that the memory is right, the popular memory is right. But the intersection, he showed brilliantly the intersection how the judicial truth or the way judicial truth was produced also affected how people remembered. Not exactly in the same way, but it affected them. So to get out of the judicial archives, to look at other sources, we still need to go back to the judicial archives to produce a more plausible understanding. So in a way, we have to take the archive as it is given to us, and yet we cannot be fully satisfied with it. We need to go out of it, to move out of the archives as much as we move into it in order to find truth. So I want to go to the second part of my talk, which is, I don't know whether I'm missing out, please, if I'm okay about it. I want the second part of the talk. So who is that, who is produced, who is included in the archives, and who's kept out? It's a well-known fact, and I'm sorry that I'm a modern historian, so my study has been largely around modern period. I do not have that much understanding of pre-modern, that means pre-British forms of legal history. And my understanding of legal history is also very limited. I have looked at legal history only from the standpoint of workers and their interaction with law. And what I find, and I want to say, that we know very well that amongst the people, amongst the archive that has been produced generally, the colonial archive, let's call it, the colonial archive, is marked by a certain principle. It's a principle of exclusion. It excludes a certain type of people who do not get access to this. And they typically are poor peasants, poor people, and often labor. Now this is, you might say this is some kind of a systemic exclusion which is there. I want to show that it is also possible that this is also produced through the particular protocols used through certain legal procedures that may have also produced this absence. That produces a kind of systematic absence in the archive. The presence of so generally speaking, one of the ways of understanding the modern archiving, or modern archives, or modern colonial archive, has been to say that this is this colonial judicial archive, let's call it in a straightforward way, or the archives which connects law and society, or history of interaction of law to society, is generally marked by a trajectory. And this trajectory is that of rule of law. The idea is that it is not the British who ruled, it was the law which ruled. And the fact of rule, of colonial rule itself, was transformed into rule of law. Now some people, and a good friend of mine and a great historian, Radhika Singha, has called it despotism of law. What she meant by that, and what is important about is this, that the rule of law idea was contrasted to the despotism of the previous rules. The Mughals, the Marathas, they were despotic, while the British brought rule of law. So law versus despotism. This was the central axis around which the colonial archive is created, the judicial archive. The rule of law, or rule by law, is the rule of law, is also simultaneously ruled by records. Rule by creating records, by showing that we rule not arbitrarily, not despotically, but through records, by producing records. So some people have called it record of the rule, or rule by records. Now this particular structure marks the formation of the archive. I'm not saying it is everything, but it is one of the axes around which the archive is created, the rule of law. Now what is this rule of law means? What is this rule of law means? Now we know that rule of law, law versus despotism is one axis, but law, as it was understood by the late 18th, but by the middle of the 19th century, first formally theorized, was the rule of contract. I want to put out the rule of law was essentially became the rule of contract. That means law, the development of law was identified with emergence of the contract. Contract whose carrier, whose actor, the main actor were individuals, as opposed to other collective groups of family or castes or kinships or clans. The rule of law was now identified directly with rule of contract. Now, contract is not all of law, neither is contract, but contract and law have a very interesting relationship. And this particular rule of contract was theorized by Henry Sumner Maine in 1862. At the age of 37, he became the law member of India. But before that, in 1859, he had written this great book called The Ancient Law, in which, I think judges would be knowing this well. I don't want to repeat this. But a central maxim propagated by that book was that the society, the progress or progressive societies are marked by a movement from status to contract. Now, this is the standard way in which the idea was that status is the societies which are ruled by custom, by kinship ties, family blood ties. It is from there to the rule of individual contract. This was the mark of progressive society. He was, in fact, at the helm of the law making, the period exactly when all the great codes of India were being made. The penal code, the contract law, the civil procedure code, the criminal procedure code, all of these, he was at helm of that. For 7 years, he was in India. So this idea of contract, why am I thinking about that? This is so crucial that he influenced hundreds of legal scholars and the way in which society was, or social development and legal development was understood also. So if it is so, I'm going to focus around one very quickly. I'll just give me 5-7 minutes, judges, with your indulgence, I seek your indulgence, to just finish this idea. That in this particular form, I'm going to look at one particular law which was brought by the British to India. Contrary to the idea that there is complete absence of labor or working people in the archives of law or the legal archives or in the judicial archives or even the colonial archives, tended to exclude these people. They do not exist as categories of people. And that exclusion, I want to point out, had to do with this particular set of laws which were brought in the 1760s. Immediately as the British gained political power, the first set of laws that they were using were laws dealing with workers. They had to deal with thousands and thousands of workers who were domestic servants, who were building the Calcutta city at that time, or weavers and other types of laborers whom every day they had to figure out. From Madras to Calcutta to Bombay, everywhere we see this extensive use of these laws, which are called master-servant laws. What is the characteristic feature of master-servant law? And that's the key question about absence of labor, which I want to point out. The key characteristic of master-servant law is that it is roughly about 500 years old already. The first laws were made in Britain in 1362, but it's the real development of these laws were from the 17th century, during the rise of capitalism, growth of capitalism, massive expansion of world trade and world economy, which happened in the 17th to 19th century. And especially during the Industrial Revolution, there was huge proliferation of these laws. What are these laws about? The law had three features. The law took the employment relation between individuals and as essentially a private agreement, number one. But number two, and that's quite crucial, these private agreements were enforced through summary procedures. So it was done through what could be called almost informal procedures. Most of the records of this that we know about, these were administered by lay justices, justices of peace, a lower level judicial hierarchy, just like what you call lower level magistrates, who deliberately did not keep records. Only through summary procedures were this there. The third important thing is, it was a law in which a civil agreement, a private agreement which is about employment, is transformed asymmetrically as punishment for the workers, which includes imprisonment, and only fines and some compensations for the masters. So it was an asymmetrical law which had this thing, which hung between the civil jurisdiction, or what we know as civil law, and criminal law. That means the workers were prosecuted for breach of contract, while the masters were not. So this criminalization of the workers was an important way to control wages and control workers. Now this was the law which was brought in many forms, not sometimes through statutes. These are statute laws. These are not common law. They come from common law origins, but they are basically through statutes. These statute laws had this. And they had another specific law which got attached to it, which is from the Equity Courts of England, which was called the specific performance. So specific performance plus these three features that I told you marked out this law. And under this law, thousands and thousands and millions of workers were administered from about 1760 till 1926, when this law was finally, these laws were passed out. But we have so little records of these laws, so little records of what happened. We have some numbers, but we do not know what stories can one write, or what histories of the people, thousands and thousands. I'll just give you an example from Odisha itself. Odia workers, millions of Odia workers have moved across the waters, gone to Burma, gone to Assam, gone to all over the world as indentured workers. And indenture contract was a species of the master-servant law. Yet we do not have records of them. In a strange way, all we have sometimes is a contract form in which there is a fingerprint and perhaps a name. I remember seeing a name, and I was so keen to find out what to find out. Radharani Devi from Banki, one village of Banki. I found this contract in the middle of a book in British Library. And I was so shocked, and suddenly a Brahmin widow had just put her thumbprint, and that's all. That's all is known about that. And we have such, so in a sense, it produced certain type of quantitative records, but no history can be there, because the disputes that arose from this were summarily resolved, adjudicated. The summary procedure, the fact that it was so important, it was so crucial, that in the case of workers, you don't have detailed record keeping or keep the records of this. So these were not tried out in any high court or any court of record, but these were tried out in magistrate courts in summary fashion. Millions, when I say millions, there are millions of workers who were administered. And so this happened from the 1960s. It was through the indenture contract, through millions of people from India. Nearly 30 million people went out of India from 1840 to 1940. Odias were quite prominent. For instance, going to Burma, about maybe 15 lakh or 20 lakh Odias had gone into Burma between 1880 and 1920. 1930, 50 years, about 20 lakhs people. Another 5 lakh people, Odia might have gone to Assam, all under these contracts, which were enforced but not recorded. So this particular type of absence is, I'm saying, is systematic absence, is produced through a particular way. Why is summary processes important for workers? The penal contract workers, the criminalization was a way to empower the employer, way to enforce essentially private agreements through state power. It was a way in which the labor market that we know of free movement of labor, was constructed and constituted. And it is this law, or the shadow of this law, which has crept into when the proper labor law started, the welfare-based labor law started. It has crept into it, my judges would know about it, as one of the key tests of employment relationship is the master-servant test. For a long time, the master-servant test was a test by which a workman was found out. It is not for nothing that it had come from the shadow of master-servant law, which had been applied for about 150 years, has crept into it. Its shadow is even now there in the vast numbers of workers. 93% of our workers in India are undocumented. The government asked by the Supreme Court, how many migrant workers are there? Said, we don't know. And because we don't know, they don't exist. They are only there so that you can beat them up when they are on the reverse migration. They're not even a number. They're not even a number. So if they're not even a number, they're not even a legal subject, they can be hidden and they can be. So this huge informal workers that we are is another result of the long arm of the master-servant law, which worked from the about 1760s till 1920s when it was formally abolished and you had the labor laws. So, my judges and dear colleagues and students, I have come to the end of my talk. I wanted to, not to sound a caveat to this monumental effort that is there in the labor archives. By pointing out that there are certain absences, I do not want to say that what is happening is, it is something so overwhelming. If I may be allowed a hyperbole, dear judges, I would say for Odisha it is a little Konarka which is being made. Thank you very much for allowing me.
Thank you, sir, for the inspiring words. May I now seek the permission from the Honorable Chair for screening a short video presentation of the newly launched website of the Center for Judicial Archives. Thank you, sir.
Welcome to the website for Judicial Archives. An archives is not only the repository of the documentary heritage of an institution, but also its collective memory and passive witness of its historical past. One of the primary objectives of an institution is archiving the records of historical value and administrative importance. The website showcases different judgments rendered since 1808, cataloging of records, descriptive cataloging of records, judgment in different languages, photos and videos of conservation laboratory, research room for scholars, the process of digitization, digitized archives worked on by the archives. The need to store important documents, prove rights and responsibilities has been around for more than 2,500 years, though modern method of systematic record keeping in India began with the administration of East India Company. The need of proper preservation of historical records and their collation and sifting are the important objectives which can be archived with a proper archival system where records of historical importance are not only preserved scientifically but also their dissemination and sharing of information may set their utmost priority. Therefore, the setting up of the Center of Judicial Archives by the High Court of Odisha is a historic step which has thrown open all its fragile records to public consultation. It is therefore the first judicial archives of India. Thank you for watching.
Now it is my honor to request Dr. Justice S. Murlidhar, Honorable Chief Justice, High Court of Odisha, to kindly address the gathering. My Lord, please.
Pranam, good evening to everyone. My esteemed colleague, Justice Devabrata Das, Justice Dr. Sanjeev Panigrahi, our stellar speaker of the evening, Professor Prabhu Prasad Mahapatra, Dr. Lalatendu Das Mahapatra, my esteemed colleagues who are present in the audience, Dr. Chayani, Collector Cuttack, all the professors of history, of law, students of law and history, and other special guests, and I definitely want to mention Professor Daritri of the Pilumodi Institute of Architecture. all the lawyers present in the audience, all the law researchers, judicial officers, my own registry, and particularly I want to mention the judges of the RRDC committee at this stage because they've been instrumental in steering this whole project. Chaired by Justice Devabrata Das, Justice Panigrahi, Justice Brigaka Shekhar Sahu, Justice Sashikanta Mishra, Justice B.P. Satpathy, Justice Sanjay Kumar Mishra, who are all present here, and also the center itself, which is headed by Dr. Lalatendu Das Mahapatra. We have Dr. Vijay Chandra Mahapatra, law consultant, Professor Basanta Kumar Malik, history consultant, Tanuja Meghamala, law researcher, Rahul Vikrampati, law researcher, Pragyan Pramita Nayak, law researcher history, Vijay Gopal Behra was the superintendent, Shivendra Mahapatra, assistant section officer, Subrat Behra, ASO, Shakti Prasad Mohanty, another ASO, and the intact team which has helped us conserve these records, the videos of which you saw a few minutes ago. I must say how delighted I am that in this Odisha Judicial Academy, this occasion has provided us the opportunity to invite not just law students, but students of history. So thank you, students of history, for joining us on this very, very happy occasion. I think we are all stunned hearing Professor Prabhu Prasad Mahapatra. Thank you, Professor Mahapatra. I was making copious notes. It was like going back to the classroom where your favorite professor is holding forth. And I was wishing this talk never ended. I'm sure, and I speak on behalf of all my colleagues here, that I think as judges we need to listen to more and more of such historical, such meaningful insights into how law works, how courts work, what do judicial officers do, what do we as judges do. This concept of producing archives ourselves and producing truths, and he thinks we are really looking for absolute truths. I must confess to Professor Mahapatra, we are always, that eludes us all the time, that absolute truth eludes us all the time as judges. We are more sure of the grays and not about the blacks or whites. So, this was serendipitous, that Center for Judicial Archives, and from that the museum. Actually, this started off as a digitization project. And I was completely taken aback to find records, some of them so well preserved, dating back to, like you heard in the video, 1808. And I had colleagues who were equally excited about this, and I'm sorry to single out one of them, Justice Sashikanta Mishra, who has been going around, sometimes with me, sometimes with Dr. Das Mahapatra, to various cities, to various centers to collect archival records. I must also share with Professor Mahapatra, we had a video chat with the British Library, and they just gave us 5 links which contain 10,000 documents. So in just 5-6 links, we have so many documents. Now it's a problem of plenty. But we need to look into all of that. Much of our records are so well preserved abroad. And we have to look for those sites and those sources. But this is just the tip. We realized, I think Justice Sashikanta Mishra and I realized very soon, and the committee of course, that we have just touched the tip of an ocean. When we started setting up the museum, every panel we looked at, every panel will probably have some 10 PhDs produced. There's so much out there to look at. So we suddenly realized that judicial repository of records contains invaluable, source of for historians, and not just historians. Somebody who's looking at judicial processes. Somebody is looking at what was it prior to the statute law. Imagine 1808 to 1860, 1808 to 1872, 1860 is IPC, 1872 is Evidence Act. Imagine those periods, how courts were functioning, decided cases, perhaps on serious crimes, perhaps on contract law, perhaps on law relating to property, law relating to family. So for legal historians, for lawyers, for judges, I think it's an invaluable resource. I'm hoping after listening to today's lecture that some historian also finds these people who've been deliberately kept out from our records through perhaps the criminal cases. Yes. When we looked at the Paika rebellion, we suddenly realized that 1803 was the first advent of the Paika rebellion, went on till 1817. Maybe our judicial records will give us some insights into the Paika rebellion. So people who are kept out of the formal civil law, and particularly since he mentioned criminalizing of breach of contract by workers, we might find in the criminal records those people who've been hidden away, whose lives have not been documented otherwise. So I think it is a project which has been well begun, and I'm sure, I'm very confident, and this first year of the Judicial Archives, that all of you sitting in the audience will carry it forward. You students are so important for this. Even if a few of you students decide to nurture this place, build it up, it will grow. So we've just planted a seed. We'll keep watering it for a while. We'll keep strengthening it. But you will continue to make sure that it grows well and yields the kind of fruits that you want for your work, academic work and research work. And this has got international ramifications. The Chief Justice of India visited the museum just 3 days ago. And I have made a suggestion to him, which I hope he will take up. I have suggested that there should be, based on the model which we've adopted in Orissa, a National Judicial History Project. That National Judicial History Project will be mind-boggling if we just pick up 3 or 4 high courts to start doing it. I'm looking at the presidency towns of Calcutta, Madras and Bombay. Those are the oldest high courts. In fact, Calcutta had a Supreme Court. So we have the oldest high courts and they have invaluable records. If you add Allahabad to it, the amount of documents we might get, and if we start archiving those documents, the kind of history that might emerge through that, it will be fascinating. It will probably also help us fix the gaps that we have in the narratives. And it won't be just the high courts. It must be the district courts. And that is what Orissa's example is telling us, that in our districts, as people know here, in Odias always know, that in Odisha itself we had many, many smaller principalities, kingdoms, which had their own systems of law, of courts, of practices. Our museum tries to showcase in a very small way what is happening elsewhere in Odisha. But the moment we bring in all those fragile records, and I must share with Professor Mahapatra, we've drawn up a standard operating procedure for all our district judges. We've told them how to preserve these fragile documents in their respective districts, because we don't have place here right now. But once this building comes up, we will bring in all those fragile records from all districts, and that will be really mind-blowing. And that is what I meant by a National Judicial History Project, which will include not just the high courts, but all the district courts in the country. We must act now, I feel, declaring all old records, definitely up to 1950, but maybe even beyond, as fragile records, because those histories must not be missed. Digitization, technology is going to help us preserve history in a strange kind of way. Technology will help us preserve history better by making these resources permanent. The other important feature of this project is, apart from being interdisciplinary, that it's not confined to lawyers and judges, but it's open to historians, sociologists, anthropologists, and economists. Anyone who's looking to see the evolution of society in India in various forms. It is also that it is an open source. We're going to make the source available to researchers, again, not confined to legal history, but any researcher who wants to research on any of these documents. We're also creating a space here for them to come and sit here and do their research and also access the originals of these documents. I wanted to acknowledge, of course, the role of the state government, the role of INTAC. INTAC trained all these people whom you see in the conservation lab, and they're integral to this whole project, and they will continue to do this and help us create this wonderful archive. We are beholden to the state government for supporting us at every inch of the way, and their continued support is very essential for this institution. So I can't think of a better fitting way to celebrate the first year of the Center for Judicial Archives with an outstanding lecture. I must say, sir, it's an outstanding lecture by Professor Mahapatra. So enlightening and gives us so much food for thought. We will remember that an archive produces history and also can exclude people from archives. So we'll make sure that we try and reduce as far as possible and include everyone in this process. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir, for the words of wisdom. It is His Lordship who first conceived the idea of establishing the Center for Judicial Archives of the High Court of Orissa. His Lordship's persuasion and guidance has only made it a reality, and today we are celebrating the completion of its 1 year. Thank you, sir. Now it is once again my privilege to request Dr. Justice S. Mullidhar, Honorable Chief Justice, High Court of Orissa, to kindly present a memento on behalf of the Orissa High Court to Dr. Prabhu Prasad Mahapatra, Professor of History, Delhi University, as a token of humble appreciation and deep gratitude. Thank you, sir. As we are approaching to the end of today's program, I would now request my Lord Honorable Dr. Justice Sanjeev Kumar Panigrahi, Judge High Court of Orissa and member RRDC Committee, to present the vote of thanks. My Lord, please.
Good evening, everyone. Honorable Chief Justice of High Court of Orissa, Dr. S. Mullidhar, Justice Devabrat Das, Chairman RRDC and Judicial Archive Committee, and other members of the committee, Mr. Mahapatra, who is the chief guest of this evening, who represents a unique branch of history that is called history of servitude. The distinguished guests, Sri Lalatendu Das Mahapatra, Director, Orissa Judicial the Archive Center, Collector Cuttack, INTEC, the people representing INTEC, Pilu Modi School, and other dignitaries who are present here. I feel honored and privileged to get the opportunity to propose a vote of thanks on this special occasion of celebration of the completion of the 1 year of the unique project taken by this High Court. I consider it a great privilege to propose a vote of thanks to all the dignitaries who have made it convenient to attend the function of today's evening. The erudite speech by Professor Mahapatra mesmerized the audience, and he has tried to link two important joints. One is law and other is history, and how he explained the umbilical cord that binds the two. At the close of the sunset 1 year before, we were exploring the ways in dark as to how to go ahead with the project with a bit unenthusiastically, albeit there was unparalleled enthusiasm found in our Chief Justice. Today, it thrills me to speak before this august gathering, to speak about the completion of 1 year of the Judicial Archive Center amidst so many turns and turbulences. Till we started the Judicial Archive project last year, the black and white image with varied text and textures of the paper used to pronounce saturated tones while they were handled. The superhero of this project is none other than our Chief Justice and the dedicated team engaged in the project. At this turning point for the Indian judiciary, I feel proud that High Court of Orissa is taking lead in this mammoth task of archiving the history-worthy judicial records. Mammoth-sized challenges arose, including the need to select material quickly, capturing as much content in scope as possible, knowing some of the content would undoubtedly be overlooked, preserving the fragile records, etc. But we have gradually fixed those issues step by step. Though the archival research in the Indian judiciary is still underrated, and I am sure this effort will contribute to the robustness of the research on the judicial history. Not to mention, our Chief Justice has shown tireless dedication in this pursuit to raise awareness about the need for the improved access to justice through technology and inspired the countless individuals to take up the cause. We are extremely grateful for all your help in making this event a success. He has always confided his confidence in the omnipotence of initiative and persistence. His enthusiasm is contagious, and his unfailing support has inspired the committee to be relentless in our efforts and always expand our horizons. I would like to Justice Muralidhar for his sincere dedication and invaluable guidance in the achievement of this endeavor, and also all the members of the committee, including our chairman, Justice Das, for their endeavor. Barack Obama once said, when we succeed because of our individual initiative, but also because we do things together. Getting to this stage of the program has involved the commitment, collaboration, cooperation, and goodwill of numerous members and persons associated with the High Court of Odisha. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by a team of very motivated and dedicated associates who worked day and night and did their job exceedingly well. I express my sincere thanks to the other esteemed guests who have taken keen interest in the program and have taken time out of their busy schedule to attend this event. My special thanks to all the registry staffs, including all the registrars who have contributed to the success of this program. My special thanks to all the unsung heroes of the RRDC and the Archive Center who have contributed immensely to the growth of our archiving efforts. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, my lord. Now we have come to the end of the program. I seek permission from the Honorable Chair to declare the function closed. Thank you. The function is declared closed. Namaskar.